Hey, Chris.
Hey, Drew.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast?
Why, yes, I have.
When we were trying to get this podcast off the ground, we had a lot of questions. Like, how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps people like to listen to? How do we make money podcasting? The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now just by reading this ad.
Right now?
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now?
That means if you want to get a podcast going and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. Join me and Chris and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. We can't wait to hear your podcast.
What makes you afraid? Some of All Fear lives at the crossroads between our greatest phobias and the horror movies we love to experience. Part pop culture and part psychology. It's time to find out why we're all so scared of the dark.
You know, maybe we don't have to go right into the open. Maybe we can just do a little brief deal.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Do you think we should go right into it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Welcome to the Sum of All Fear podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and this is my lovely wife and co-host, Chris.
Hey, hey, hey.
We want to start off by thanking our friends and listeners who have endured these first couple episodes with all the growing pains and general lack of podcasting skill, which was pretty serious. We also want to thank the people who have reached out to us. We've had quite a few people who have been listening and have been sending us their input, and it's been really helpful. Heath and Brent and Tori and Metal Chris and anybody else you can think of. We've had a handful, so it's been really cool. We really appreciate that input. And just to get it out there at the beginning of the episode, we did this at the end of the episode last time, but you can follow us at Some of All Fear Podcast on Facebook, at Some of All Fear Pod, P-O-D, on Twitter. And we're happy to announce that as of like this past week, we're on Apple iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Breaker, we're on Overcast, we're on Radio Public, and a bunch of other platforms.
Yoo-hoo!
Yeah, so that's pretty sweet. So we are available everywhere now, I think, pretty much. Anywhere that you want to listen to a podcast, we're out there. So that's pretty cool. Please subscribe. Please rate us. We wouldn't mind if you lied a little bit, even on your ratings.
I don't believe in lying.
No, lying is a really good idea.
But
when it comes to rating this podcast.
But DM us first and tell us what you really think.
And please leave some comments and likes on our social media posts. We'd really love to hear your feedback and chat about the episodes. If you liked our page on Facebook, we've got a pretty good clan of Facebook folks going now, about 125 in the last week that have followed our page, so that's cool. We would love to hear your feedback. We would love for you to see our posts. So if you're not seeing our posts now, please go to our page and hit the follow button so that our posts will actually go onto your feed. You know how that works with Facebook deciding what you get to see.
Algorithms
And whatnot. And if you're so inclined, share the page around, invite your friends. We would really appreciate it if you like the podcast, of course. And I know Chris and I would love to build a cool little community of weirdos.
Oh, yes, please. We love weirdos.
Weirdos, just like us, that are into all kinds of weird shit. So now that we've got that out of the way, we didn't do our cold open. I do have my whiskey again. I did pour some Rebel Yell at Chris's. Chris encouraged me to be mildly drunk during the episode.
No, let's clarify this. Metal Chris encouraged you to be mildly drunk during the episode.
He did. He wanted to hear a William.
Not Chris.
He wanted to hear a William Shatner impression, which I'm not promising anything. My Jimmy Stewart is pretty bad. My Shatner's even worse.
I love your James Stewart.
So, how's your week been, honey?
Really
Ships
hectic.
passing in the night for us this week.
You know, it's been just such a crazy week and really felt off too. And I know that we talked about that today, just kind of feeling off kilter, off center. So trying to get back in to step with things lately.
The winter does that to me. Like, it does it to me every year. And I think, honestly, the only season that I feel really settled is fall. I don't know why. Fall is like a perfect season for me. Like, in between summer and winter, I feel nice and settled.
I feel like the only season that you're settled in is fishing season.
That's true too.
So
I wish I could do fishing anymore, but I don't, because it's now baseball season in the spring instead of fishing season. So I coach baseball and Little League, and it takes up like literally every bit of free time that you have in the spring, and most of your free time too. Mm-hmm. So it's a tag team effort, but it's a lot of work. But you're back into roller derby again, which has already bruised your ribs.
Oh man. Yeah, last week at practice, my first practice back, I was doing a drill and I hit a cone and my wheel got stuck and I just face planted, and I'm pretty sure that like my chest is bruised, or maybe
just say it. Your boobs are beat up.
My boobs are beat up.
I have seen you take some serious elbows to the tits before.
It didn't help that Blocky jumped on me and dogpiled me while I was down, but I couldn't.
That's Blocky Balboa, by the way. That's her roller derby name, Blocky Balboa.
Yeah,
which is pretty badass.
Blocky Balboa. And so it didn't help, but I love Blocky's dogpiles, and I'm just glad she's back.
Yeah, I like it. So we've been doing a lot of that kind of stuff this week. I want to get another article going. I wrote that top 10 horror movie article for the website, for the sumofallfearpodcast.com website. Go check it out. We only have a few things up there right now, but you can check out the podcast on there, and one article. But this week we watched Bird Box yesterday, which has been I hate movies that just become such big movies like instantly, and everybody's writing about them, and people on Facebook who don't like horror all of a sudden are like, "Hey, have you seen this Bird Box movie?"
Snob.
And I'm like, I'm going to hate this. I'm going to hate this movie. And I listened to a couple podcasts this week, and there were some mixed reviews, and some people really liked it. Some people didn't like it. I have my own critique of it that I'll probably write on the website this week. So look out for that.
I am more intrigued to read the book, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the movie fell flat where it could have absolutely soared.
Yeah,
and we talked about that last night.
There's a couple of things there were some things that I really liked about it, and there were some things that I was like, man, they could have done so much more with this storyline, and I haven't read the book.
Yeah, you could have walked away from that storyline just feeling gut-wrenchingly, what's that field of philosophy?
Like existential?
Existential, like that sense of existential dread.
And there was a lot of opportunities to kind of get a little deeper and talk maybe like something that's a little more supernatural or spiritual or religious, and kind of mix in some philosophy things in there that instead they really didn't explain any of the kind of what was going on behind the apocalypse. It was just kind of thrown out there. There was really a brief section where they kind of threw in something that was very... They threw in
everything possible.
They threw in everything but the kitchen sink, but really gave no actual... It was very postmodern of
Aliens,
them.
I don't know. Maybe it's religion. I don't know.
Yeah, it was very postmodern. It was like everything caused this. I don't know what it was. It was called this in different cultures, but here it is. And that was the only explanation they gave, which I thought was kind of...
Boo.
Anyways, this isn't a breakdown of Bird Box. I will write that this week, though. Now I have to, because I said it.
Yep.
So it has to be done.
It is decided.
But let's go ahead, instead of rambling for too long, let's get into our trivia game.
What the fear?
Can you say it again?
What the fear?
Our new trivia game, What the Fear, which I did terribly on last time. So bad. I was so disappointed in myself. And my brother called me.
Shout out to Heath.
Yeah, Heath. My brother Heath messaged me and was gloating that he got 2 out of 3. But nobody was there to confirm, so I will neither confirm nor deny that actually occurred. But anyways, let's get into the trivia game.
Can confirm.
You can't confirm.
Can confirm. Okay, so your first fear is esoptrophobia.
Ooh, spell that one for me.
Esoptrophobia. EISOPTRO phobia. Esoptrophobia. Isoptrophobia.
Oh, isoptrophobia. Something to do with the fear of misunderstanding. No, the fear of books. Something about books or something about misunderstanding.
Wow, you're way off.
Am I way off?
You're really far off.
EIS?
Isoptrophobia. It comes from the Greek root isoptro, meaning mirror.
Oh, isoptrophobia. Isoptro
Yeah,
with a P.
isoptro.
Oh, I didn't hear it right.
Isoptrophobia.
Isoptrophobia. Wait, hold on. Give me one more second. EISOP. Isoptrophobia.
TRO phobia.
Isoptrophobia. And it's EIS.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
The fear of...
I love making you feel inadequate.
I really, really, really do.
Next time I'm going to make it the fear of inadequacy.
All right,
Speaking of which...
What's the definition?
No, it's not the definition. It's this really interesting tie to isoptrophobia is Pamela Anderson suffers from isoptrophobia. She refuses to watch herself on tape, of Baywatch and porn fame. Pamela Anderson.
Softcore.
Yeah.
Softcore.
I don't know.
Yeah, pretty softcore. She didn't have any hardcore. Well, there was
pretty hard.
That was really bad.
Oh, so shut up.
That was the Tommy Lee video, though. I mean, that brought me into adulthood.
Yeah.
Brought me into manhood as a child.
That would have been around that time.
So isoptrophobia.
She has a lot of trouble with reflections. Seeing herself on TV. She does not like mirrors. I don't know how she manages it with the, acting job that she does. But
so is it a reflection or is it either or? It doesn't matter.
It's a reflection. And so more specifically, isoptrophobia is the fear of the reflection of whatever you see in yourself in the mirror. Interesting.
So what's the root of that? Did you look at that up at all?
The root?
The root of isoptrophobia?
Yeah, I already told you this.
Oh, did you? Totally missed.
It's for the Greek word isop, which means mirrors.
Oh, which means mirrors.
Yeah. Or mirror.
I would have thought that would have been like oclophobia there is an oclophobia that is a fear of mirrors.
There is a catoptrophobia. You know how many of these phobias have kind of dual meanings, not dual meanings, but dual definitions or
Interesting.
titles.
Well, an oclophobia was the first one that we did on Darkness,
Right.
but I was thinking of with an O, like
I'm
Oculus,
sorry,
like
yeah.
Interesting. So, okay, what's the second one? Let's move on.
Let's
move right along here.
I'm sorry.
I'm 0 for 1 already.
I know.
I was way off on that one.
Okay, here's another
I was thinking
one.
of EIS. There's a word called eisegesis, which means like the reading into of a text, like reading wrong into a text, reading your own views into something.
That'd be interesting to see if anybody had a phobia about that.
Who knows?
Anyways, your next phobia is entomophobia. ENTAMA phobia.
Entomophobia. ENTAMA. Entoma. Entomophobia. Has nothing to do with enemas.
No, it's not enemophobia.
It's not enemophobia?
Not enemophobia.
I think I might have enemophobia.
Maybe next week we'll do enemophobia.
Entomophobia. The fear of bugs crawling in your ear.
No, I see where you would get the etymology, like try to pull that root of
Entomological.
But no, it's actually the fear of doors or of moving doors.
Of doors?
Of doors. So
the revolving doors would give you a lot of
the revolving doors
problems.
Invented by Theophilus Van Kannel in 1888. They were, originally built as storm doors in rectors in Times Square, and he built these doors in order to avoid chivalry. And when
so you didn't have to hold doors open?
So he didn't have to hold open doors for women or fight other men to do it.
What an asshole.
He made a revolving door. And now Matthew McConaughey of All Right fame
is not all right with moving doors?
Is not all right with revolving doors.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now what about moving doors like in the grocery store? Like doors that automatically open. Does it include that too?
No.
I guess if you had a problem with that, you would it would probably be called the same thing, right?
But the revolving door piece
in particular
is also really it pairs well with agoraphobia and claustrophobia. The fear of getting caught inside of the revolving door.
That does not surprise me because they are kind of creepy.
There's plenty of movie scenes where arms and limbs are chopped off by revolving doors, and yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Matthew McConaughey struggles with revolving doors. Okay, are you ready for your final one?
I'm 0 for 2. I'm guessing that I'm probably going to be 0 for 3 most of the time. So.
What the fear, man? It's forking embarrassing.
It is forking embarrassing.
Forking embarrassing. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Lepidopterophobia. Lepidopterophobia.
Spell it.
Lepidoptero phobia. Lepidopterophobia.
The fear of blood coming out of your feet.
Man, weirdly specific.
Yeah, well, I was trying to break down both sections of the
And
word.
very wrong.
I figured it was.
Wow.
I don't know. Hey, I've had plenty of hangnails on my toes where it started to bleed. It's not pleasant.
Your thought process on these is fascinating.
Lipids.
Lipid.
That's where it comes from. And patero is like pedia, like I was thinking podero, like podero.
Taro from the root for fly. Patero.
Oh, okay.
Root for fly.
Well, that
Nicole
makes sense.
Kidman. She's afraid of butterflies.
Butterflies.
Lepidopterophobia. She's afraid of butterflies.
You're saying that to me like I should know.
Come on, man. I'm even doing the Italian hand. Like the come on.
I would have never gotten that in a million years.
I know.
Not in a million years. So so Nicole Kidman has a fear of butterflies.
Yes, fear of butterflies. She said when she was a child, she would come home after school and she would see a butterfly or a moth on her fence. And this is, New Zealand or Australia, one of the two.
Where is she from? One of those.
And she would run around the backside of the house, avoid the fence, climb over the fence in another part just to get away from the butterfly. She said that once she tried to overcome this fear by kind of immersing herself at the American Museum of Natural History, she went into the butterfly cage exhibit and let them land on her. But, and I quote, she still hates the feel of butterfly bodies.
Ew.
Like,
when you put it that way.
When you say it like
that.
Oh,
sounds terrible. But I mean,
Oh.
really, what's the difference between a spider and a butterfly? There's not much. They both have little legs and they're all crawling on you.
pretty.
And they're pretty to us. Yeah, but I mean, to somebody who has a fear of it, I suppose
One
they look
was
just as
born
threatening.
an ugly-ass spider, and the other was born a caterpillar and struggled to become something beautiful. Okay? Respect for butterflies.
Oh,
everywhere.
what the fear is going to be the bane of my existence, and it's going to just make me look like an idiot every single week, isn't it?
Please make sure to post if you played along with us how you guessed at what the fear.
I've got to start.
I've got to hear that.
I got to start getting less. Stop thinking about the root so much and just throwing something out there.
Most of these,
like the fear of grapes.
Most of these are
Talking grapes, like last week.
Yeah, talking grapes.
Oh, I got a funny story about that one. So the fear of talking food. Heath again, my brother, sent me something and said, "Oh man, I just want to post California Raisins videos on Kira Sedgwick's Facebook page now." And I said, "Oh, that's funny. You must have read seen the interview that he did with was it Conan or Jay Leno or something." That Kevin Bacon did about his wife, because he specifically mentioned California Raisins, but he didn't know that. He was that was like his example, which I thought was great.
He's
the best talking
kid,
food.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, we were raised on California Raisins. All right. Well, I think it's time to get into our episode here. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's time for episode 3, and we're going to be diving into Aerophobia and 1983's Twilight Zone, the movie. Are you ready for Aerophobia?
I'm ready.
Aerophobia. Okay, let me give you the quick definition. Our phobia today is aerophobia, and it is the fear of flying, which you probably could have. Now, if you given me one like that, I probably could have figured it
Or
out.
aviophobia.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You don't ever pick any easy ones that I could look at and go, oh, that's that. Aerophobia is the fear of flying, or more specifically, the fear of being on an airplane, helicopter, or other flying vehicle, and is also referred to as aviophobia. Mm-hmm. And etymologically, it comes from the Greek eros, meaning simply air, or in the modern usage, aircraft. So, Chris, tell us about today's phobia.
Today's phobia.
Today's phobia.
We talked about how it literally is kind of the modern day phobia. It's something that did not come about, or we don't see mentioned before.
Well, it didn't exist before the invention of flight, right?
Yeah, before World War I, we don't see it mentioned. And it was first noted in a UK biomedical literature about trauma related to flying, and they called it aeropsychosis.
And this was after World War One, correct?
Yes. And then we see it more commonly discussed, very en vogue in the 1950s, the height of flying as we're going into the 60s.
Keep going.
Nowadays, it affects roughly 12.5 million Americans.
Sorry, I was worried we weren't recording anymore. That's why my fear jumped in there. I had a fear that we weren't recording anymore. Keep going.
It affects roughly 2 to 6.5% of the population experiences some form of aviophobia or some form of.
So it's similar to fear of heights.
Correct.
As far as the percentages, right? I mean, it's about the same. It's pretty common. It's another one that's fairly common. And again, that's a clinical diagnosis, but probably, I don't know. I would guess 50% of us have a fear of flying. So
most people,
there's a lot of people
tend to experience some sort of anxiety about flying or when flying.
It doesn't seem right. If God had intended us to fly, He would have given us frickin' wings.
Right. And we talked about in the height episode proprioception, or the body's sense of, or the brain's sense of the body's position in space, and how much that must mess with our brain's sense of where the body is in space. Being so high up there, going so fast.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'm sure that doesn't help things very much when it comes to anxiety.
Not at all. Not at all.
But the chances of a crash are relatively low. 1 in 11 million, excuse me.
Well, we know phobias typically are irrational.
Right.
So the fear of flying, you kind of started diving into the history there. We've got this World War I. We've got these pilots coming back from really the first people to ever really fly a whole lot, right? Were these World War I pilots. And they came back with this, what was it? Air psychosis?
Aeropsychosis, I believe.
Aeropsychosis. So they're coming back. They're all having some PTSD. They're having some issues. They're dogfighting. They're doing all kinds of weird, crazy shit up there too.
Seen some things.
So what is it that, as it develops through history and now where we are today with modern travel, what is it that people experience when they have to fly, or when they think about flying, or how far do people go to avoid flying?
Which one of those do you want me to answer?
All of them.
Ah, man. Okay, so much pressure. Well, first of all, it comes about like any other fear. It can happen vicariously, where you see something that is really traumatic, like 9/11. We saw a resurgence, especially from pilots and civilians, of aerophobia, because there was this tension about flying now. It felt unsafe because of the tragedies that occurred. And so it can be brought about by exposure to those things. It can be brought about by vicarious exposure, so you don't even have to experience it. You can just experience it secondhand and watch it.
So if you're watching a movie or something, like we'll get into later, it might trigger that fear.
Right. It could also trigger that fear. And then
I actually experienced that a little bit, actually.
Really?
I'll talk about that later. That's interesting.
It can be passed down from generations too, as we're learning more and more nowadays about post-traumatic stress and how it actually affects the genes on a cellular level, and is passed down from generation to generation, and gives those future generations a predisposition to low tolerance to anxiety related to these things. So we see it affect people on a cellular level, any phobia really, once it gets to that extreme.
So specifically aerophobia, we were talking about how technology, right? So when technology starts to expand and we start seeing new inventions, we see new things being, coming about, a miracle of flight and all these wonderful inventions, the vehicle. Now we have these things all create new phobias. Mm-hmm. They didn't exist before. So now they're, we see that with technology too. We got all these Black Mirror episodes that show us a whole slew of things we should be terrified about.
Yeah.
In all those episodes. So,
there's actually
flying's kind of like that.
There's actually a fear of not being in reception with your phone.
With your phone. Yeah.
And it causes this intense anxiety, similar symptoms. It's still, an anxiety disorder, fast heart rate, sweating, palpitations, difficulty breathing, racing thoughts. You name it. It can cause it because it's just that anxiety reaction. And it pairs really well, again, with other phobias or anxiety disorders like agoraphobia,
which is the fear of open spaces and the
right.
fear of, or the fear of crowds. It can be either or.
Right.
Which I have a very deep family history of. My mother has it. I have an aunt that has it, an uncle that has it, and I probably haven't experienced it myself. From time to time too. So another family connection where there's multiple people who have the same phobia. But I can see where I know that she was never comfortable flying when I was growing up. And even back when you could smoke on a plane, she would chain smoke in the back of the plane to try to get through a flight.
I read an article about flying in the 1960s and how the flight industry used smoking to kind of cloud people's vision of basically their own anxiety while flying. So to make it more luxurious and kind of take away from the fact that we're not supposed to be hurtling through space like this. And it tends to cause some natural anxiety because physics,
Yeah. I have a really interesting story about my dad. My dad had a friend that, or a coworker, guy that he worked with, and they used to fly. My dad was an aerospace engineer, actually, interestingly enough. But he had to fly all over the place. He had to fly to Washington, D.C. all the time. He had to fly to Alaska a lot. So he was constantly flying for business. He had a guy that he worked with that was so nervous about flying and also such a nervous smoker and needed that cigarette to calm himself down, that in order for him to get to his destination, like say he was flying to Washington, D.C., he couldn't fly a direct flight, a nonstop flight from like LAX to Washington, D.C. He would get 3, 4, even 5 layovers on purpose.
Wow.
So he could never go longer than like an hour without landing and having a cigarette.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? When they outlawed smoking. Because back, I'm sure when they outlawed it on airplanes, it was a major issue for a lot of smokers. Because that was their way that they coped with, cigarettes are a way to cope with, stressors. Mm-hmm. So to not have that and not be able to do that while you're smoking, when you had already for who knows how many years, that was a major issue for this guy.
And he was an aerospace engineer.
Sure. So he knew everything that could go wrong.
Right. Which
is also my dad too.
Which is funny because we see with aerophobia that it tends to show up in kind of 2 types. The first type is the folks that believe like flying is unsafe because physics, again, we're not supposed to be able to do this.
It's not right.
Doesn't seem
it ain't
right.
right. It ain't right. It's not natural. It ain't right. I don't like it.
And then we have the second classification of folks who tend to have more of an anxiety based on being trapped in a closed situation, either closed up high or somewhere that they can't get out of, or somewhere where something embarrassing might happen. Like you have to use the bathroom, you vomit, the baby starts screaming and you feel a lot of embarrassment, something like that, that you just can't avoid.
Now, would that still be considered aerophobia? Or
yes.
is it aerophobia like with like a secondary phobia of blah 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 blah?
Well, okay, so in order to be the primary, it has to be the thing that causes that reaction. It's not consistent over time. So if this person doesn't have a fear of vomiting, say on the ground, they're just like, ew, that's gross. But then in the air, they're very afraid of vomiting. Mm-hmm. Then we go, okay, this is not related to the vomiting. It's related to where she's at or what's going on when this idea about vomiting comes up that makes her so anxious.
So it's more about the anxiety of being trapped somewhere that you can't get out of, that you're in this situation and being in this situation that causes this tension, this anxiety. Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting. It's something that I've experienced, not necessarily on a plane, but you brought this up the other day when we were talking about this. When I was in college I'd get like bubble gut or something like that. Whenever I was in a situation like a quiet classroom, I'd always have to sit in the back. But if I was in a meeting or something where it was like a small room with a few people, I would be so uncomfortable and my stomach would start gurgling. It would sound like I was ripping gnarly farts, but I wasn't, because it was all internal. It was all in my stomach. But it just caused me so much anxiety. And I actually got diagnosed with like a stomach issue because in college, and it turns out it was all anxiety. It wasn't anything else.
Think about what was going on for you in college. You were wrestling with so much. There was a lot of tension in your mind and in your heart. I think in college in general, everybody's going through peer pressure, and they're going through issues with dealing with being accepted and all of the things that come with being, in high school and college that you're dealing with. And I think it hit me the hardest in college because I was in a new situation. High school, I was pretty familiar with everybody that, kind of grew up with people. Right. Wasn't as big of a deal. College, I was thrown into a situation where I didn't know anybody, and, all those anxieties come on. Right. But I can see that being something in a plane where you're uncomfortable and you're getting all of this wave of anxiety about, I can't get away from this situation. What if this person next to me and this person over here? And our phobias, or in our fears, I should just say, tend to worsen with stress too. So they become more intense, more frequent, more, severe. And I think of you and how your fear of flying kind of developed. When would you say that you first realized, like, oh man, flying is now a little bit terrifying to me?
Yeah, it never got, I mean, it still isn't crazy. Like, I can still fly, but there was a time, I would say probably around, I figured out it was after I turned 30. I already had a kid. But after this, they got a little older and I was kind of moving into my 30s a little bit, it definitely got worse. And I think the fear for me, there was 2 points that I think really started to come on. I don't think I cared as much in my 20s, didn't have as much connection to, I didn't have any kids, didn't have as much connection to other people. It wasn't like I could just fly by myself. It was no big deal. Now when I fly by myself, all I think about is, you and the kids and people and, what could happen if I'm flying by myself? If you're with me, no big deal.
Great.
Yeah. You guys can all go down in flames with me, and we're good.
Death sentence.
When we went to Dallas earlier, we flew to Dallas earlier in the year, and it was fine. I had no problems at all because you guys were all with me.
If I'm going down, you guys are coming down.
Yeah, as long as everybody goes down in flames together, I think I'm good. But also, I think there's that fear of loss of control, which really is a big issue for me because I don't like other people driving. I like to be the one in control. I like to be the one in control of the thing that's moving me, that's flying me through the air, at 500 miles an hour.
And flying is kind of a magnet to all of these vulnerabilities we have. It exacerbates things, it puts a little bit of tension on you that can really bring these things out. That fear of loss of control, that kind of existential panic.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just waves over you when those situations occur.
So, do you think there's any movies about fear of flying? We watched a shit ton of them this week.
We did.
We watched a lot of fear of flying movies. Is there anything else you want to say about this phobia clinically before we dive into our movie section of this deal of Aerophobia?
Sure. So there are some celebrity case studies out there.
Yes, please.
Wes Anderson actually goes to Europe.
Well, he's a weirdo anyway. We know that.
Yeah.
By boat. He goes to Europe by boat.
By boat. Whoopi Goldberg, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul once turned down an invite to perform for Prince Albert of Monaco at a Red Cross ball, citing that she would work on her fear to him as the rationale. And our friend Bob Newhart, of Mad TV psychiatrist fame, is also afraid of flying. So I think he
should just stop it.
He should stop it.
So I should just stop it.
There you go. I mean, you don't want to go through life being scared of being buried alive in a box, do you? I mean, that sounds frightening.
Yes.
Then stop it!
I can't. I mean, it's been with me since childhood.
No, we don't go there. Just stop it.
No. We don't go there. So these folks really should look into a couple of things. If you're struggling with flying, I recommend, no matter what severity you have a struggle with flying, go ahead and check out the mobile app, Sky Guru. It gives you pre and during flight information. It has sensors to educate passengers as flight patterns occur and provides calming messages. So it really educates you about what's going on. Why are we moving slower? Why are the wings dipping this way? Why did we just drop altitude? You know, what's the pilot's
That's really cool.
rationale?
I would
for
really
that?
enjoy that because knowledge is the thing that bothers me the most. I don't know why we just went down, or
Right.
why we moved to the right, or why we moved to the left, or
Right.
that's really cool.
Right.
I'll have to check that out.
Another suggestion for
Skyguru?
Skyguru.
.com, or is it just an app?
It's a mobile app.
An app.
Yeah, it's a mobile app. The other thing that you'll want to check out is recommended highly watching flight patterns in the days or weeks before your own flight. You can Google, flight patterns online and just watch the flight patterns during a day and how many planes take off and their paths and how many things don't go wrong in order to kind of normalize that fear of all the things that should go wrong.
I don't know if that would help me because
I
have
don't
you
know
looked at the
either.
frickin' flight patterns of those planes? Like when you see all the planes in the air, like they always do it around the holidays when everybody's flying.
Right.
They show you how many planes are in the air at one time, and you're like, how are they not running into each other? They're
Everyone's gonna
everywhere.
crash.
They're everywhere.
I think Sky Guru is going to be more up your alley.
That's a great app. Very cool.
So that's just to get you through, again, graduated exposure therapy, EMDR, CBT, virtual reality, kind of just like heights, can also help with fear of flying. Again, if you actually fear the sensation of flying or something about flying, if you fear vomiting on a flight, I'm not sure if that's going to work for you, but, find a therapist that really knows their stuff.
Well, it's interesting, too, just a quick mention. You have the fear of heights, which we talked about last episode, but you do not have a fear of flying. So it's not necessarily hand in hand. So acrophobia and aerophobia can be exclusive. Like you don't have to have both. You can. There are people who have both, but it's not necessarily true that people who have aerophobia are also afraid of heights.
I'm also claustrophobic, but it doesn't bother me
doesn't
in
bother
an
you.
airplane.
That's so interesting. So it's definitely like there are just the brain is just a fucked up place. Like we have learned this time and time again.
I love it. It's so fascinating and it confuses the hell out of me. Like why that doesn't make any sense. Why?
You will hear us say that time and time again. The brain is just a very fucked up place, and we are here to. We're not going to unfuck it, but we will. We're gonna try to do our best to just talk about how crazy it is because it's a nutty place. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about movies. Movies. We gorged ourselves on some frickin' plane movies this week. Mm-hmm. Well, I did. You passively watched a few of them.
I watched the important ones.
You watched the important ones. The other day, I woke up at like 4 a.m. and binged watched a couple because I couldn't get back to sleep. So I knocked a few out there. But as you know, our whole philosophy here at Sum of All Fear is to talk about these phobias, and then we want to talk about the pop culture side of it, the less scary side of the more scary side in some cases. Depends on how you look at it.
Vicariously traumatized me again. Like I had that rush of fear when seeing the movie again.
See, you know what's funny is. Well, no, that was not our feature film.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
That wasn't our feature film. That wasn't our feature film. That was an honorable mention film. So we've decided now that in our third episode we've tried to get some structure to this thing. We decided our first section of movies will be honorable mentions, where we'll talk about those movies that touched on the phobia but didn't make our final feature presentation, and then we'll have our feature presentation, which will be the one that will kind of break down the most. Although it's really hard not to dive into some of these honorable mentions a little bit deeper too. So it's going to be fluctuating, whatever. Fuck it. It's just, us and 4 of my drinking buddies listening. So we're good. So the first one that we'll talk about, actually, I don't want to dig into this one yet. Let's dig into this one later. Let's talk about the really bad ones first, because I had a couple of bad ones this week that I was like, you know what? I got to watch these. I've never seen them before, but they are on planes, and Snakes on a Plane was not one of them. We did not, I don't know if we'll tackle Snakes on a Plane during the snake episode.
Again,
but I've never seen it.
Again,
so.
Are you afraid of snakes in general across situations, or are you just afraid of snakes
on a motherfucking plane?
On a motherfucking plane. That's a big difference. That would be
I don't know.
Aerophobia.
I don't know. I wanted to get to it just to see if it touched on this phobia at all, but I didn't get to it. I've never seen it as much as it's been a cultural icon. I feel a little bit inadequate that I haven't seen Snakes on a Plane, but the first one I want to talk about, though, for honorable mentions, is the 1973 made-for-TV movie, The Horror at 37,000 Feet. This was super cheesy, but when I saw it, I was like, fuck, I've got to see this movie. Never heard of it before, but this movie was... it was a typical early 70s made-for-TV movie. It was great. It was starring Chuck Connors, the rifleman, was the pilot, who was also in Tourist Trap, which is one of my favorite horror movies. Russell Johnson, who's the professor from Gilligan's Island, was the co-pilot. William Shatner was an angsty, drunk ex-priest who had lost his faith. Was that good? Metal Chris, not so good. I'm only 2 whiskeys deep. My Shatner was not good at all. Buddy Ebsen, who was Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies, and Paul Winfield. So the cast was freaking stacked in this thing. I mean, you can't get more, early 70s recognizable people than those guys, which is hilarious. But it was really, really bad. I was kind of going into it hoping it would be like bad good, but it was really just pretty bad.
Was that the one that you were watching really early in the morning when I was sleeping?
No, that was a different one.
Oh, okay.
No, Horror at 37,000 Feet I watched like a week ago, and it was basically the concept behind this movie was there was a couple on the plane, some rich couple that she was an heiress of some kind of property over in Europe, in England, I think, and she wanted to have a piece of this church or monastery that was on their property or something that she was going to take back to the States with her. And so they loaded it on this plane, and it was incredibly heavy. It was so heavy that they could only have 10 passengers on the plane because the weight requirements required that they only have 10 passengers. So, you had, and those 10 passengers ended up being, the cast that I mentioned and the pilots and whatnot. But this thing was haunted, this artifact. And so these weird druids, these druid ghosts took over the plane and haunted them, and they had to figure out how to sacrifice them. At one point they sacrificed a baby doll to see if they could trick the ghosts, which didn't work. It was great. So unintended hilarity ensues. Check it out. It's pretty hilarious. The other cheesy one I watched was at 5 in the morning, and it was called Flight 666, which was a 2018 movie that basically there was a serial killer is unknowingly on a plane, and when the plane starts having malfunctions, passengers start seeing the ghosts of the dead women that this serial killer killed off, leading them eventually to realize that the pilot was the serial killer. And here's a little tip for Flight 666. If you're on a plane and you find out the pilot is the serial killer, don't confront him until you get on the ground, because he's the guy who needs to land the plane. Bad idea. So that one was it was actually not as bad as I thought it would be. It was actually not for a somewhat B movie. It was pretty well done. I was entertained the entire time, so it wasn't too bad. The other one that I watched at 4 in the morning was not really a horror movie. And I had a hard time with this one because this one honestly was the one that I wanted to choose for our feature presentation, but I just could not justify it because and I know Vertigo last week, kind of horror. It's not really a horror movie either. It's a psychological thriller, but it's Hitchcock, so fuck you. I don't care. I had this argument on Twitter with somebody about Vertigo being not a horror movie. And I get it. I know it's not one of his technical horror movies, but it's, anything to me that's Hitchcock is pretty freaking horror. Horror-ish, anyway.
Yeah, he's kind of the epitome.
I would say. I mean, I know it's not, there's nothing like super scary in Vertigo, unless, of course, you have a fear of heights. But it's, to me, it's Hitchcock, so whatever. But the movie that I really wanted to do for this was Alive, which you haven't seen Alive. Alive is the 1993 American biographical survival drama film, which details a Uruguayan. You had a Uruguayan roommate. Uruguayan rugby teams crash aboard Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 into the Andes Mountains on Friday, October 13th, 1972, which is a true story. It's terrifying. Probably, in my opinion, the most terrifying crash scene that I've ever seen in a movie. And I remember, and maybe it's because of some kinder trauma that I had, but I watched this movie, I believe, if I didn't see it in the theater, I saw it right when it got released to video, and I was about 12 maybe. And it really was impactful, to the point where when I woke up at 4 a.m. and decided to turn it on, the crash scene had me like gripping the sheets. Like I realized I was all tensed up.
You were white knuckling.
I was literally white knuckling. Like I was sitting there and I was physically nervous.
Reacting, yeah.
And anxiety was like gripping me watching this scene. And it's a really terrifying scene. Like they're flying through the Andes Mountains. Everything's fine. The rugby team's having a blast and they're throwing the ball around. They're all excited about their match coming up in Chile. And then all of a sudden they start hitting some rough weather and you start looking out, you see the peaks, of the mountains. And then the pilots start going through this storm and then they're in clouds and then all of a sudden it clears up just for a second and you see them plowing into like the
Andes Mountains.
Like a peak. Yeah. Like coming in too low on a peak and clipping it. And then you see the tail flying off and all this crazy shit going on. And then, the back of the plane disappears. So a bunch of people die. But then the main part of the plane, in the front and the middle, I guess, go careening down this mountain like a sled, and then end up stuck in the Andes mountains, way up in the mountains, and a bunch of people survive, a bunch of people die. But one of the most terrifying crash scenes ever, like truly gave me like aerophobia just watching it, like you were talking about earlier, like just watching that movie.
Vicarious traumatization.
Totally gave me a fear of flying.
I mean, obviously it wasn't at the traumatization level, but it definitely activated all of that in your brain, and your brain, is reacting very readily to it.
It's crazy. And honestly, I would suspect that most people, when they watch a scene like that, especially an intense one that's realistic and it's a true story, would probably have that reaction, right? Mm-hmm. And then it goes on, and I don't know if this makes it a horror movie or not, but they end up eating each other for survival, right? I mean, that's pretty jacked
horrible.
Up. But they lasted 74 days in the mountains, in the snow, in the weather, 74 days by eating their dead, and 16 of them ended up being rescued. So if you haven't heard that story, I highly recommend Alive. It's got Ethan Hawke in it, who is definitely a vampire, because that guy looks exactly the same now that he did back then, which was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And John Malkovich is the narrator. So there's just some good stuff. It's a great movie. Check it out. Sorry I broke that down so long, but and also it was directed by Frank Marshall, who did Back to the Future. He produced Back to the Future and Indiana Jones and Poltergeist. He only directed like a few movies, like 3 or 4. One of them is Alive. The other one is Arachnophobia.
Oh, later.
So we will definitely be hitting on some Frank Marshall Arachnophobia a little later on. So those are my honorable mentions for fear of flying. Oh, we did not get to the last one.
Yeah.
We have to talk about that one. Sorry, we got to get to that one.
Where's my honorable mention?
Yeah. So the one that you guys probably are most familiar with.
And the one that gave me that kind of flooding vicarious traumatization feeling that I felt and remember feeling the first time I watched this movie.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Alexa, play John Denver's Rocky Mountain High.
Rocky Mountain High by John Denver, starting now on Amazon Music.
Come on.
No, you know someone's gonna die.
He was born in the summer of his 20th year, coming home to a place
All right.
that's never been
All right, Alexa,
before.
stop.
Damn it, she doesn't listen to me.
Alexa, stop. There we go. She stopped. That movie certainly could have been called, like, Don't Listen to John Denver, or when you hear John Denver, get the fuck out. That could have been the...
John Denver,
that could
Death Harbinger.
John Denver, Death Harbinger. Because every time they heard John Denver in this movie, and this was...
Every time.
By the way, this was, if you haven't figured it out yet, Final Destination...
Horrible.
Came out in the year 2000, which was perfect because I think I was a freshman in college, and you were
12.
Yeah, you were about right at that perfect age to see it.
No, I'm sorry, 14.
Yeah, so you were in that awesome time to see a good horror movie.
It scarred me for a long time, and I hadn't seen it since then. And we watched it the other day, and I was so into it. I was sitting up on the couch, all tensed up, like you mentioned earlier, and I didn't notice how tense I was until I was like, whoa, what am I doing? Like, my arms are sore. And I was just so tense from watching that first opening scene and remembering watching that first open scene and how I felt back then. Ugh.
I have a confession to make. I honestly, after watching the first one, I think I realized that I had never seen the original. I'd seen 2, I've seen 3. I don't think I'd ever seen the original, at least not all the way through. Because,
right.
you I'm sure it was on,
TBS
off and on. And
TNT.
there were scenes that I remembered. But if you're not familiar with Final Destination, the beginning section is what is related to aerophobia. High school students board a plane bound for Paris for a class trip when one student has a premonition of an impending explosion on takeoff. Plus some John Denver music is playing when he's waiting to get on. He hears Rocky Mountain High while he's in the bathroom before he gets on the plane, which he goes, John Denver, plane crash. So that's the John Denver connection, is that John Denver died in a plane crash. So every time they heard John Denver, they knew shit was going to go down.
Oh,
did you not?
I did not
catch
know
that?
Oh, that makes it so worse. I just didn't like the association.
You didn't catch that connection?
I didn't like the association of the song, because then you knew someone's gonna die.
And it wasn't always Rocky Mountain High. There was a couple of other John Denver songs that would pop on, but it was always John Denver.
And one time it was Rocky Mountain High in another language. I believe it was French.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was like, oh no.
So they get kicked off the plane, right? So they get kicked off the plane.
Freaks out.
The kid freaks out because he has this premonition, and there's a couple other students that get kicked off the plane. I believe there's like 7 of them, or six of the kids, or something like that.
Some of them get off.
Some of them get off, and then
on.
a teacher has to stay off with them, so she ends up staying. And then as they're sitting there, right there by
It fucking explodes.
by the gate, they see the plane take off. The plane explodes. It blows out the windows of the airport, and everybody on the plane dies, and they live.
The survivor's guilt that they must have felt and experienced. And then knowing as you're watching that death is like trying to creep up and, get them still because they were supposed to be on that plane.
Yeah.
It's the worst because
It's
I'm like,
the best.
no, you got out of this. You get free pass.
Nope. No, it's it's so good. It's honestly, like, Final Destination
Stressful.
is a really,
very
really,
stressful.
really great franchise.
It does a great job at stressing me the fuck out.
It's great, and it has some of the best some of the best kill scenes of any
of the most memorable.
franchise. And honestly, I think I remember 2. I think 2 is where the log comes through the
in.
car. It must be, because that one I remember. I always remembered that one, but yeah, definitely check out Final Destination for at least the beginning scene about aerophobia. But then it has some kick-ass kill scenes. we're going to keep chatting this one up. This one's going to be a long one. So we're just now getting into our feature presentation.
And now our feature presentation.
The movie that we're going to be diving into is Twilight Zone, the movie. This was directed by some people that are pretty unknown. You probably have never heard of them. Steven Spielberg. Mm-mm. Never heard of that guy?
Nope.
John Landis.
Who?
Joe Dante. And George Miller. Twilight Zone, the movie, is a 1983 American science fiction horror anthology film produced by Steven Spielberg and John Landis as a cinematic interpretation of the 1959 to 1964 TV series created by Rod Serling. The film is a remake of 3 classic episodes of the original series and includes 1 original story. Landis directed the prologue and the first segment. Spielberg directed the second. Joe Dante the third. And George Miller directed the final segment. Dante recalled that in the film's original conception, the 4 stories would be interwoven with characters from one segment appearing in another segment, but later problems with the film precluded this, which included a number of people dying on set, which was really a bummer.
Oh my gosh.
Google that. Google that. It's an interesting story. It definitely put a little wrinkle in.
It'll just make you sad.
Yeah, well, it'll put a wrinkle in John Landis's career. That's pretty well known. If you're a horror fan, you know all about it. But yeah, kind of a bummer. But we are just going to focus on the 4th and final segment of the anthology, which is... I don't know how my drum roll is going to sound on the audio, but
I know.
It might be terrible. But we're going to focus on Nightmare at 20,000 feet.
No problem. Mr. Valentine, I know how you feel. Lots of people are nervous about flying. But if you look at statistics, you're safer up here than on the ground. That's right, safer than your own bathroom.
No, I'll be perfectly fine.
So this 4th segment is a remake of the original Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Here's the synopsis. While flying through a violent thunderstorm, airline passenger John Valentine is in an airplane. Is it an airplane? He is in an airplane.
Lavatory.
He's in an airplane lavatory, which is the bathroom.
Right.
That's what lavatory means.
Right.
I don't know if you knew that.
Washroom.
It's the loo. The airplane loo. He's in an airplane lavatory as he tries to recover from a panic attack due to a fear of flying, which we know is also called aerophobia or aviophobia.
Aviophobia.
The flight attendants coax Valentine from the laboratory and back to his seat.
And offer him sedatives, even though they are flight attendants.
Then after he sits back down, Valentine notices a hideous gremlin on the wing of the plane.
There's a man on the wing of this plane!
And begins to spiral into another severe panic. He watches as the creature wreaks havoc on the wing, damaging the plane's engine. Valentine finally snaps and attempts to break the window with an oxygen canister, but is wrestled to the ground by another passenger, an off-duty security guard. Valentine takes the passenger's gun, shoots out the window, causing a breach in the pressurized cabin, and begins firing at the gremlin. This only serves to catch the attention of the gremlin, who rushes up to Valentine and destroys the gun. After they notice that the plane is landing, the gremlin grabs Valentine's face, then simply scolds him for spoiling its fun by wagging its finger in his face.
Such a gremlin thing to do.
Such a gremlin thing to do. The creature leaps into the sky as the airplane begins its emergency landing. The police, crew, and passengers write off Valentine as insane. However, the aircraft maintenance crew arrives and finds the damage to the plane's engines complete with claw marks. Meanwhile, a straitjacket Valentine is carried off in an ambulance.
Everyone thinks he's crazy.
Dun dun dun.
But gremlins are a folkloric, mischievous creature that specifically preyed on airplanes and mechanical things.
I know. You think you're trying to get out of actually reading some of what you had earlier, but I want you to read it. Yeah, I need you to read it. But first, let's tackle the beginning, because he is stuck in a laboratory, right? In the beginning. The very beginning, right? We hear the whole like, and now you're in the Twilight Zone clip, right? And he is stuck in a laboratory. he is having all of the classic symptoms of aerophobia, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's going
really
through
accurate
panic
depiction.
attacks. This is the reason why we chose it, really, because he is truly suffering from a fear of flying. Like, he is having that panic attacks, sweating, nausea. Things are spinning around him. He is struggling. In the beginning of this clip, right? In the beginning of this episode, it's bad. So what is it? He's experiencing those classic symptoms, right? Those classic, and really those are the classic symptoms of anxiety related to phobias in general.
Right.
All of those terrible things, and he's in the laboratory, and the plane is starting to hit bad weather. So the flight attendants are like, Mr. Valentine, you need to go back to your seat. It's time for you to get it. Can we do anything for you? Can we help you? Blah, blah. And then he eventually comes out.
To his credit, he does sit there and practice some cognitive reframing and some self-talk, really, to kind of bring that anxiety down to a more manageable level.
As he's going back to his seat.
Which is a real valuable therapeutic tool.
Yeah, as he's going back to his seat, he's breaking down all of these statistics, right? He's breaking down like you're right, you're right. It's much more common for me to die in a car accident. It's much more more, and he's going through all of these statistics that kind of break down like, okay, I'm being irrational. I'm going to go back to my seat. I'm going to calm down. Waitress, waitress. Sorry. Oh my gosh, Sherry, my sister's a flight attendant. She would literally murder me if she heard me say that.
Oh, he's gonna tell her.
Oh yeah, he is too. He lives down the street. That's not fair. Not a waitress, a flight attendant is trying to calm him down. She offers him a sedative, which I believe he eventually takes. But his biggest problem was he looked out the fucking window. Bad idea.
Yeah.
Right? Not a good deal. And originally we think he's just losing it. Right? He's seeing things. He's seeing things. He's having hallucinations.
Of his anxiety. He's kind of unsure if he sees them or not as well.
But what does he really see? What is he actually saying?
Gremlin.
A gremlin. Tell me what a gremlin is. You talked about it briefly a minute ago, but I want to hear you actually read the description of what a gremlin is, because I think it's really cool.
So a gremlin is a folkloric mischievous creature that causes malfunctions in aircraft or other machinery. While depictions of these creatures vary, past findings present the animal to be similar to the chupacabra, with spiky backs, large strange eyes, and small clawed frames that featured sharp teeth. Their origin is found in myths among airmen, claiming that gremlins were responsible for sabotaging aircraft. Specifically, it originates in the Royal Air Force slang in the 1920s among the British pilots stationed in Malta, the Middle East, and India. Oh man.
India. So without you having to read it all, because we've gone through this a couple times now. Gremlins are really had their origins in World War I, right? Mm-hmm. Pilots came back. They were traumatized. They had PTSD from dealing with all of the crazy shit that went on in World War I, mm-hmm. right? They created this mythical creature that basically fucked up their planes.
That was responsible
for their
malfunctions,
for why they crashed and whatnot, right?
Well, yeah, and it was a way for the airmen to kind of deflect their own feelings of anxiety about these planes just crashing out of nowhere or things happening out of nowhere.
Seeing their buddies die by flying, falling down to. So they said,
a way to explain it, like a way to kind of pass the buck or pass the blame, so that it didn't lay on their fellow airmen.
So these guys that crashed, they could blame it on these little creatures mm-hmm. that were on the wings that were ripping up wires and doing stuff that was causing them to crash.
Right, and one of the military pilots in the Luftwaffe, almost. In the Battle of Britain during the summer of 1940, was quoted as saying, his name is Bresci, was quoted as saying, morale among the RAF pilots would have suffered if they pointed fingers of blame at each other. It was far better to make the scapegoat a fantastic and comical creature than the other member of your squadron.
So the gremlins were a mischievous creature that just wanted to fuck with planes.
Right.
That was their only deal. So they just apparently lived in the clouds when would just hop onto planes.
They did not come about until, airplanes came about.
And so World War One happens. Mm-hmm. We have this basically original. There's no mention of gremlins before the 20th century, right? Mm-mm. So this was a 20th century invention, which is really fun because, we all grew up with Gremlins as this horror movie horror-ish movie that featured these little creatures that screwed with toasters and and screwed with toasters. But they obviously had a connection to this myth, right? Because they all screwed with technology. They were always messing with, wires and doing weird stuff with, and had this mischievous quality about them, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't really trying to murder you.
No, they were kind of equal opportunity tricksters.
It's funny. There's all these original scripts, like multiple versions of the original script of Gremlins that are floating around. The original scripts were way more gory.
Dark,
gory. So much more gory. It's awesome. You should if you get online and check out some of the early scripts of the Gremlins because they're really gnarly, like way gnarly. But that's where we get this thing that we all grew up with, that we think Gremlins as these, the Mogwai turns into these Gremlin
Unless
guys.
you read a lot of Roald Dahl.
Right.
And he was a member of the British RAF as well.
Right, the Royal Air Force. He was a Royal Air Force guy.
He experienced this folklore firsthand, and he used it when he wrote his first short story, The Gremlins, in which gremlins were tiny little men who lived on RAF fighters, and Dahl called the wives of the gremlins Fifi-Nellas, and their male children Widgets, and their female children Flibberty Gibbets.
Yep, I remember these. I remember running across those names in a number of his books. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool how something that is a 20th century myth invention, which has got to be kind of rare, right? I mean, a lot of our myths and our story. I mean, I'm sure we have them, but our folklore really comes from ancient history or fairy tales or medieval and Renaissance time. But this is something that's really uniquely 20th century, which I think is really kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, we'll have to do some research and see if we can find anything else or see if, the populace has any other ideas.
So going back to our movie, right? He sees this gremlin. Gremlin's fucking with him, right? He's screwing with him on the wing. Eventually, he tries to shoot him, and the gremlin just wags his finger in his face.
Mm-hmm. You mess with my
yeah, you screwed me, buddy.
And then just hops away.
And nobody sees him, just like in the William Shatner one, right? The original episode was the Twilight Zone episode. It was episode 123. And interestingly enough, it was directed by the original episode in the original Twilight series, was directed by Richard Donner, who is a horror icon. The guy directed The Omen, which is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And Omen 3, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. He also did Goonies, Lethal Weapon, Scrooged. Pretty badass director. That's a pretty good resume.
Yeah.
He also did a ton of iconic TV and a bunch of other movies. But that episode famously stars William Shatner. Our remake, by the way, I didn't mention Valentine is John Lithgow. Mm-hmm. I love John Lithgow, and he was so good in that as John Valentine too. But the original episode stars William Shatner, and he's a guy who had just gotten out of a mental facility because he had a breakdown on a plane originally, and then he's nervously sitting through takeoff and seems to be doing all right, and then he sees the gremlin on the wing, which the 1960s gremlin it's a little cheesier. He's like in an ape costume.
It's really bad
with just a different mask on. But it scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. I loved it. It's still one of the most remarkable Twilight Zone episodes of all time. One of my favorites. And watching it again, after the movie remake, it really highlighted some of the discrepancies between the old one and the new one. But both are awesome, man. They're fucking great.
Yeah.
So that's Twilight Zone the movie. Definitely touches on aerophobia with John Lithgow's Freak Out.
Does a pretty good
and the
job.
original does as well with Shatner's mental issues, and definitely has some problems with flying. You can see the, he's
the anxiety.
He's flying with
anxiety.
a woman who you can't quite tell. I think it's his girlfriend or his wife, and she's trying to help him through the flight and all that kind of stuff. So it fits right into our little phobia deal. We're flying in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll be going to New Orleans.
Which I'm definitely not going to be thinking about any of this shit, while we're flying at all.
You'll just use
I'm not
the
gonna be thinking
Sky
about
Guru app.
Final Destination or Gremlins
Sky
on the Wings.
Guru app.
Sky Guru is going to get me through. I'm not going to think about flying into a mountain when we go across the Rockies, going to Denver, or because we have a stop through in Denver. I'm not going to be thinking of any of that stuff. Or fucking druid ghosts, taking over the plane.
This is bad timing for this episode, I guess.
None of that stuff. Won't be thinking of any of that. So next episode we'll be tackling algophobia.
Algophobia?
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 I don't know yet. We'll find out. The fear of pain. I don't think anybody likes pain.
I don't know. Some people like pain.
That's true. If you even twist my nipples a little bit, not a fan.
No,
not a fan at all. Smack my back, I will hit you in the face.
So you can dole out a nice, sexy spanking.
I'll throw a spanking in there every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, fear of pain. So I don't think I'm not a big fan. There are some people who enjoy it, but I think I think most people are not, they wouldn't intentionally dive themselves into
Actively seek it out.
and to seek out pain, right? I mean, there's a community.
I don't know. Prove us wrong.
There's definitely a community out there that enjoys it, but maybe not to the extent that some horror movies might be doling it out, right? So
Right.
If you have some movie ideas for algophobia, for the fear of pain, let us know on social media. We would love to hear your suggestions for what we need to tackle for the next episode, what movies we need to watch, because I have some ideas of the movies that I want to dive into for this phobia, but we would love to hear your suggestions as well.
Yeah, he hasn't seen everything yet.
I've seen a lot, but I am definitely there's still a lot of movies that I need to see. So we really enjoyed this episode, guys. We really had a lot of fun researching it and had a lot of fun digging into the phobia and the movies associated with it. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time,
Stay afraid. Stay very afraid.
bye, guys.